All right, it is that time again. It is Saturday. It is day 2. I keep thinking it's round 2, but that's not the case when you start the tournament on Friday. But it is the Awesemo.com March Madness live before lock. We had 16 games yesterday. We got 16 more games. So to help break it down, I bring in who else? Of course, Matt Gajewski. Are you refreshed? Are you ready to go? 16 up, 16 down once again today.
Yeah, man, you know what? The excitement level hasn't really dropped off. Not much sleep over here as I'm just pumped for today's slate of games. You and I were talking. You said to me you thought it might actually be a better slate of games today, and I happen to agree with you.
I really believe that. Some of my favorite teams, some of my favorite sleepers, and my favorite bets are on this slate. So I want to get into it. Before I do, though, we've got to talk about our friends at Monkey Knife Fight. They are sponsoring the show today, and their player props-based contests, easy to play. They don't require the time commitment that the other DFS sites require. And in order to be competitive, you're in charge of what you're doing, whether it's the buy-in type, the contest type, everything at your fingertips. And it's not just for certainly basketball. We've got UFC, PGA, esports, soccer, anything that you guys want to play, they have. If you haven't signed up, go over there and use the promo code Awesemo. You will get an instant first match deposit bonus of up to $50. Sign up today and give it a shot. Definitely worth considering. But we've got 16 of these bad boys. We're going to dive into it. Same format as yesterday, except now we're starting in the top left. We've seen, let's just get to it. We've seen Norfolk State play once. For many people, that was enough. They now get the Zags. We knew it was going to be a big spread, and it is. It's 33 points, 154.5 point total. So looking at the DFS slate, Matt, we talked about this with Hartford and Baylor. Is it the same concept? What do we do here with the Zags against the clearly undermatched opponent?
For betting, I don't know how you lay the points with Gonzaga. I don't know how you take the points with Norfolk State. Gonzaga could win this game by 50 if they want to. Just a matter of how much time they want to give guys like Kispert, Timmy, and Suggs. I don't know what that is. So it's very difficult to handicap. I don't have any bets in the game. And for DFS, it's equally as challenging because you don't know how many minutes Kispert, Timmy, and Suggs will play. They're all very, very expensive. So in your DFS lineups, you're allocating a lot of salary to a roster spot that might just play a half, which is very difficult to do.
Does that mean, though, because obviously I'm in line with you. I don't love this game. If I had to bet it, I'd probably lay the points. But again, not something. Can you look to secondary options on Gonzaga, or is it really the same problem that even though they're going to win comfortably, the quote-unquote backups aren't going to see enough volume to really justify it?
I think the players you might want to look at, so you're not looking at a Yai either. He's 7,500, but he's somebody that probably plays limited minutes. Andrew Nembhard, he will probably play limited minutes as a starter himself, but with Nembhard, he's only 5,800, so you're just not eating the same kind of salary. And I mean, Gonzaga has a team total that is the highest I've seen all season. It's nearly 94 points. Outside of Nembhard, you're looking at probably a little bit extra run for ancillary players like Anton Watson and Andrew Cook. Those guys are typically playing between like 15-ish minutes a game, maybe 15 to 20. So there's a chance maybe they're up to 20 to 25 today. Those players are cheap and potentially worth a look, but I think you could even see them go deeper into their bench, which gives me some pause on the entire Gonzaga roster.
On the other side, of course, we know it's going to be tough, but can they get enough points to justify a Devontae Carter or somebody else? He was terrible against App State, but they got the job done. Is there anyone on Norfolk State, or are they simply a write-off?
I think they're mostly a write-off. The game against App State was terrible.
Yes.
And that now they're stepping up to the elite of the elite in competition. You could tell me that Norfolk State scores 40 points today, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know they're implied for 60, but you're just dealing with a really wide range of outcomes, and not very many of them are good.
No, it's degrees of bad. And again, the product of, when we talk tomorrow and whatnot, we're going to cut these slates in half to 8 games. You may be funneled a little more into some situations. Here, I really don't think you need to mess around on any format, whether it's betting or in the DFS street. So let's keep it moving. Like I said, we got a lot of games to get to. Missouri, Oklahoma, very competitive game. Mizzou is ticked from pick 'em to 1 to pick 'em to 1. They're 1 right now. 1 point dog, 139.5 point total. I want to start on the other side because this had some news. De'Vion Harmon, big piece, missing because of COVID. What does that do to Oklahoma? Is it a major shakeup or just a minor blip?
He's a pretty significant loss here. He's not the best player on this team. That would be Austin Reeves. But this Oklahoma team has battled COVID stoppages at multiple times this year. And it wasn't always a stoppage, but they did lose players. First, they lost Brady Manick. He was out for a series of games. And then in a separate instance, they lost Austin Reeves and Alondas Williams. And really what that did is it allowed them to gather some depth, cultivate some depth with their team. So players like Umoja Gibson, who on DraftKings right now sits at 4,500, he's had a series of games where he's played 35 plus minutes and shown some upside as a starter even. So I think he's a solid value play. And I actually don't think it's that big of a deal for an Oklahoma team that actually showed the ability to win some games without their better players because of the depth they cultivated. Right now, I see this at +1 for Oklahoma, which is the number I've been looking for. So I'm actually going to take this right on the spot.
All right, there we go. Speaks the importance of line shopping. Get over there. One more guy, Alondas Williams. Do you think he can kind of bump up in the rotation as well, or are you capping that at Gibson?
So they're going to play Reeves every single minute. Brady Manick's been playing north of 30 minutes if he's not in foul trouble. Harkless is in a very consistent role. And now I think Gibson probably plays 30 to 35 minutes. Outside of that, you've seen Alondas Williams minutes jump between 29 down to 9, back up to 14 in the last 3 games. I think this is more of a matchup thing, who they use as the 5th player on the court between Williams and Kirk Kuwath, Jalen Hill, even Victor Iwalker. They're all probably going to mix in for a few minutes there. So I don't know if I'm willing to take that risk, especially with Gibson at such a favorable price already.
So you look to the other side. Missouri's a tough team. They're kind of just solid, in my opinion, across the board. They don't do anything outstanding, but decent team, and it's reflective in the prices. You know, Drew Smith is at 6,900, but they've got Kobe Brown 61, Pinson 6, Tillman 5-6. Like, they're all very bunched. How do you prioritize, or do you prioritize anyone on this Tigers side?
Drew Smith is a bit cheap here. So if you're going to beat Oklahoma, you have to shoot the 3. They're very difficult inside to match up against. A lot of that's Manick, but again, Kuwath, Hill, Iwalker, they're pretty strong defenders here. So for Missouri, I think if you're taking anybody, it's probably somebody like Drew Smith over a Tillman. Now, Missouri's not a great 3-point shooting team, which is also why I think this is a bad matchup for them. As a whole, they shoot 32% from 3. When you isolate Drew Smith specifically, he's their best 3-point shooter. He shoots 38%. So you get him at a cheap price. He has a strong usage rate, and he's going to play every minute. He's been out there for 38 minutes in back-to-back games. So Drew Smith, I think, is in play. I wouldn't say he's a preferred option, but I don't hate getting to him at 6,900 on DraftKings. He's even cheaper on FanDuel.
And you do lean, as you mentioned, to the Sooners actually winning the game.
Yeah, between Missouri's struggle shooting, which is how you have to beat Oklahoma, and then the depth Oklahoma's cultivated, along with the line movement. They're dogs now. I don't think Harmon is worth 3 points in the line. So you saw Oklahoma open around -2. Now you're getting them as a +1 dog in some spots, which is what I just hit it at. I'm very comfortable taking that.
All right, very good. Moving on. Here we go. This is a key game for me. We've got a 12-5 here, and a lot of people are talking about this with UCSB, Santa Barbara, taking on Creighton Blue Jays. If you have seen me talk college basketball this year, you know that I'm very high on Creighton. And if you watch the Georgetown game, you wonder why they let me on shows, because Creighton just insanely beat down by 25 points, but they are a 5 seed here. Let's start with them. They are the favorite, as they should be. 7.5-point favorite, 138 total. What's there to say about this team? I love it. Zagorowski, Ballack, everything that they have size with Bishop and Jefferson, but they're erratic. They're a Jekyll and Hyde type team. What do you make of Creighton, and where are they coming off a beatdown in the Big East Championship?
Yeah, they are a Jekyll and Hyde team. A lot of people only watch that Georgetown game. They think Creighton's a bit overrated. I completely disagree, having viewed their entire body of work. I think Creighton's actually significantly underrated in this spot, and they should be around a 10-point favorite. So I do have Creighton against the spread here. Played significantly better competition. They've beaten significantly better competition, and they're a good shooting team. That's how you have to beat Santa Barbara here, who ranks 148 in 3-point defense. Guy like Zagorowski, he shoots over 40% from 3. So a matchup nightmare for this team. Santa Barbara on the other side, he plays almost every single minute. Fantastic usage rate for DFS. I think he'll be a little contrarian because of his price at 8,400, but on FanDuel, 6,900 for Zagorowski. That's a very strong value play over there. So I like him particularly on the FanDuel side, but I think Creighton handles Santa Barbara, who hasn't played anybody this year.
Yeah, no, they're just a team, and I actually thought Irvine was going to beat them. That's not what happened. So credit to them for taking down the Big West.
They did twice early in the year.
I know, but it's just not a team that I really have a good feel on how good they are, to be honest. One more guy, though, before we move to that side of the ball. I mean, when I think of three-point shooting with Creighton, I think of Ballack, but it hasn't been the case particularly lately. Do you go to a guy like that where predominantly all his fantasy point production is predominantly tied to three balls? Or do you say you want a guy who's maybe more well-rounded, going to give you more than a couple assists and boards a game?
With Ballack, he actually hasn't been shooting as much this year, which is really interesting. He had a pretty high shot rate. It approached 20% last year. Now he's taking about 13.5% of the shots. Most of them do come for three, but he's just less involved. So on a site like DraftKings, where you have him at 5,800, I would rather just spend up a little bit to somebody like Denzel Mahoney, who does have that peripheral upside. He's a buy low right now after his usage rate has kind of fallen, but he still has the second highest usage rate on the team. So that's where I'm looking on Creighton outside of Zagorowski.
On the other side, do you think that Sau can have a presence inside? McLaughlin obviously bringing the ball up. Those are the big two for this team. If they win the game, it's going to have to be them. But how effective do you think they'll be?
I don't think they'll be very effective. And I think just based on price, there's other players in that range that have better usage rates overall. So you're talking about a team that's 7.5 points an underdog here. Creighton's fairly solid on defense. Their biggest weakness is against the three as well. So I think if you're just looking to somebody, it's probably McLaughlin. But again, 7,600, there's just other players I'd rather play in that range.
No doubt about it. I think they are a little premium. And again, I'm with you. And Creighton, I'm more on them. I think that if it wasn't Gonzaga looming, they could have been a really dangerous team. And that's kind of unfortunate. But let's round out the first pod here. Keep it moving. Fascinating game. You've got Ohio coming out of the MAC, the automatic bid. This spread has dropped all week. It is down to 7 points. They're a 7-point underdog against Virginia, who, as far as I know, is in Indiana, but who knows? They've had a COVID issue. They've been late. They've barely been able to practice or do anything. So it's a fascinating situation. Let's start with the Cavaliers side. You're always in tune to this. Obviously, that's one of the many reasons you should follow both of us on Twitter. What is the status of Virginia? Clearly, they're going to play this game, but have they really had any time to prepare?
I believe they've gotten in one practice since they've been here. They've been in quarantine for essentially the better part of 10 days now. So to be honest with you, no, not really. They haven't practiced a ton. They do just hold significant advantages over Ohio, which is why you still see them as the favorite in this spot. But you're dealing with a similar situation to Virginia Tech last week. They just haven't played a lot of basketball recently, and most of it coming via practice time.
When you look at Virginia, we know that they play at a Liberty-like tempo. It's extremely slow. They try to smother you, shorten the possessions. Does that make guys like Hauser, Huff just not playable because of the tempo?
Typically, I'm looking elsewhere, but on this slate, I actually think Huff in particular has a pretty strong matchup. So Ohio doesn't have a ton of size as a team. Huff and Hauser, two massive forwards for this Virginia team. Both are going to play at least 30 minutes with upwards to play like 35 to 40 if the game remains somewhat competitive. 7-point spread, so Vegas and bookmakers are suggesting that it remains semi-competitive. They're the two most used players on the team, and it's not close. So Hauser in particular, his rates are very good. He's taken 25% of the shots, 20% of the rebounds lately. Huff, they've been limiting him a little bit down the stretch, but in their most recent game, 36 minutes. So I think he's a strong buy low. Big peripheral upside with Huff, too, a dude that just eats up blocks.
When you look at Ohio, they're a completely different type of team. They want to push the tempo. They've been successful doing that during this run in the MAC. They're scoring, 80-plus points practically every game. Preston leads them on the outside, dangerous guard. What do you think of him at 8,500? Are there other guys that you want to go to? Or do you say, against Virginia's defense, even though there are question marks, I'm not going to mess around with a team like this?
Yeah, it's more so Virginia limiting teams' possessions. Their defense has been a little weak this year, actually, particularly against three-point shots. They're ranked 183rd in the country there. That's just because Hauser and Huff are the strength of that team, especially on defense inside. So with Ohio, you're definitely not getting the 73 possessions they average per game. So do you want to take a guy like Jalen Preston at 8,500 when you can get some other studs for just a little bit more money, or even pay down for somebody like Cam Thomas in the same price range? They do run an extremely narrow rotation on Ohio, so you're getting a tight distribution of minutes. Rather than play Preston, I think you could maybe go down in pricing and get somebody like Ben Vanderplas at 6,200 on DraftKings, whose usage rate, it's very good at 17%. You're seeding quite a bit of usage from Preston, who's up at 23, but Vanderplas in particular, He's still taking 20% of the shots, 15% of the boards, and 30% of the assists. Very involved. He shoots 36% from three. That's where you beat Virginia. So if you're taking somebody on Ohio, I would rather save a little bit of money dealing with the limited possessions they're going to see.
What kind of chance, before we close this out, do you give them much of a chance to actually win the game?
I think it's better than it normally would be just because of Virginia's stoppage. Typically, teams are playing even slower when they're coming off COVID stoppages. They're extremely volatile. We've seen teams just crazy variance coming off of these stoppages. Even yesterday, Virginia Tech looked amazing in the beginning of the game. Towards the end, it just looked like their legs were out from under them. A couple guys foul out, and they ended up dropping the game to Florida. I remember Michigan State coming off their COVID stoppage, scored 37 points in their first game back. And I know we're talking about different teams here, but just speaks to the volatility when these teams do have these pauses.
Yeah, it's very hard to quantify. And going against a dangerous team, I think Ohio is pretty interesting. All right, let's go to the West Bottom. Before I do, though, Chad, it's good to see everyone back here, staying with us here. And we got a ton of basketball. Like I said, one day down, many more to go. If you can hit the like button, pump those up, and subscribe to the channel. We have so much content. We just had an NBA show. Certainly the MMA guys will have you prepared. There's all sorts of jangles going on in the octagon. I'm not the one to talk to about that. I'll be watching basketball, but they got you covered. Pete the Heat, Jason Floyd, and co. Also, Chad, if you have not, and you know what, you missed one day, but there are major contests across the board. Go to awesemo.com/join. Jump in the package. $29.95 is still a great deal, even with one day down. It's not too late to do that. And yeah, let us know how your brackets are doing. Are they busted? Did Purdue end you? Or do we still have a lot to play for? But here we go to the bottom of the West bracket. Another team, same story. We've got Eastern Washington, 10.5-point dogs playing Kansas, but Kansas has more questions than answers right now. Let's start with the Jayhawks. What is the status? They seem to be missing players. Who is that, and where are we at heading into this game?
Like Virginia, they had to bow out of their conference tournament due to COVID issues. They are missing Jalen Wilson today, probably their best interior player, a huge absence. They're missing rotational player Tristan Anaruna, another big man inside. They are getting back David McCormick, but he was the first one that popped for some of these COVID issues. I'm not sure if he tested positive or if it was a protocol violation, but he is eligible to play today as long as he continues to test negative, which it appears he is on track to play. Their coaching staff came out and talked about David McCormick playing in a limited role, which makes sense. He's been in quarantine for the last 10 days, hasn't stepped out of his room. So he hasn't practiced, hasn't played with the team. No one knows what kind of shape he's in. With that said, Kansas is extremely light in their interior right now. So they're down McCormick, at least in a limited role, Wilson, and Tristan and Aruna, which sets up for Eastern Washington, I think, to potentially cover this spread at 10.5.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see what they do here, because I never can they really put like Lightfoot out there for a serious run? I mean, he's someone that gets the job done in spots, but can they push him 30, 35 minutes here?
I don't know if they can. They don't really have anybody else, though. And the other players they have for depth haven't played at all. So Tyon Grant Foster hasn't played a single minute in each of the last 3 games and beyond. You have Jethro Muscadin, who's been injured for part of this year, but he also hasn't even logged a minute recently. The only forward they have on their roster who's played is literally Mitch Lightfoot. One thing Kansas has done in the past when they've dealt with depth issues is just play small. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see 4 guards out there at all times, with Lightfoot maybe getting 25 minutes. So in that case, you're probably looking at Bryce Thompson playing, or DeJuan Harris with elevated minutes.
Yeah, I mean, they could with Braun as well. So when you look at this Jayhawks team, I mean, Garrett, of course, is the leader, but he's an incredible defensive player more than a pure scorer. Can they manufacture enough, or is this just a sluggish game in terms of what we can expect on the DFS side?
I think if you're looking to bet the total, it maybe plays to the under. Eastern Washington plays fast. Kansas is about average, but again, teams typically are playing a little slower coming off these stoppages. Eastern Washington has a really efficient offense, and they have a lot of players that can shoot the 3, which bodes well against Kansas. If you're looking at the Kansas side for DFS, I think you're dealing with an extremely narrow distribution of minutes between Garrett, Braun, and Agbaji. The best price among them comes for Christian Braun. He likely has to deal with an elevated usage rate. He's very good in the periphery already. Even with Wilson and McCormick active, he's taken 20% of the rebounds and 23.5% of the assists in their last 3 games. Now you're removing Wilson entirely. You're moving maybe half of McCormick's minutes. That usage has to go somewhere. And Braun actually has some decent size. They may just choose to use him in an elevated capacity due to the limitations they have in the post.
He's an interesting player. Early in the year, he was actually pretty dangerous from behind the arc. He's really toned it down in recent weeks. I'm interested to see kind of how they operate there. But Eastern Washington is a team, out of the Big Sky. I have not seen them much. They got past Montana State in that last game. But let's talk about them briefly. I mean, we know Garrett can take away really whoever they need him to cover. But how does this team, who does like to play up tempo, I mean, do they punish inside with Groves, or is there another way to attack? How do you see it falling for Eastern Washington?
I do think they can exploit some of the size limitations that Kansas is going to have. Groves at his price, this is Tanner Groves we're talking about. He's 7,300. I was a little disappointed to see him coming so expensive. I thought we might get a nice value play in him, but DraftKings did the right thing. They priced him up. He's taken 25.5% of the shots, 27.5% of the boards, but he's 7,300. I think that's fair. With Eastern Washington, they do run a narrow rotation, so I think you can look to some of the value plays. Guys like Michael Meadows at 4,600, and then the other Groves, Jacob Groves, he's 4,700. They'll approach 30 minutes or play more than 30 minutes in competitive games. We just haven't seen that a lot in Eastern Washington's recent play. But a guy like Meadows has good rates. He has a 14.5% usage rate. He's only 4,600. If this game remains competitive, you should see him play 30 minutes. The difference between this slate and yesterday's slate, I think there's some viable value plays. Yesterday, you're really scratching the surface on sub 5K plays. In this slate, you can tap into a bunch of guys and maybe take a stars and scrubs approach.
Well, let's see if we can keep that going because, you mentioned that. We'll take on a different dynamic. Next game up, we've got Drake, 6.5-point dogs, playing USC, 11-6 game. This is the first team that we've seen Drake play. They got past Wichita a couple of nights ago. Now they have to take on Evan Mobley and co. Let's start with USC. The Pac-12's looked good so far. Simple question. He's 9,500. Do you think he dominates to the point where you can roster him?
I do think he dominates. I think he's in play today. And it's not so much because of Mobley himself, but because of the constructs of the slate. There's a lot of value plays. You could even take 2 players sub 4K and roster a guy like Mobley who has immense upside. And positively, Mobley's seen an increased role, if you can believe it or not. He's played at least 37 minutes in 3 straight. Absolutely enormous rates. 24% of the shots, 30% of the rebounds, 22.5% of the assists. Just unbelievable usage for Mobley. Makes sense. He's going to be a lottery pick. Now, on the other side, Drake doesn't have any size. Their tallest player, Darnell Brody, has been forced into elevated action recently, but he's typically averaging just north of 20 minutes per game. He's going to have to be out there and do his very best to stop Mobley. I just don't see any way Drake can possibly stop him today.
Yeah, he will be fouling out. Spoiler alert. The one guy I want to mention on Drake before we move on, though, is Youssefu. Played all 40 minutes against Wichita State. Wouldn't be surprised to see that again. Wouldn't be surprised to see 21 more field goal attempts. Does that type of volume put him in play for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, he's played 40 minutes in all of their recent games, at least the last 3. And you mentioned that the shooting. So he's typically just going to be a shooter. He does have a 16% assist rate, which is modest, but the 21% usage rate, all coming via shots. Sometimes you hear the narrative that it makes these players boom bust. To a point, though, if you're literally going to take 22 shots, there is a floor that comes with that because unless you're App State, you're not going to miss every single shot. So Youssefu, I think, actually has a decent floor compared to some other guys that are just pure shooters, but he's really a creator. He can score from everywhere. I think that is a decent place to target. He's still too cheap at 6,500 because he plays every single minute. USC obviously very strong inside with the Mobley bros, but they are giving up a lot of threes. They rank 196 in 3-point defense.
Having seen them quite a bit, particularly against Colorado, Oregon, teams like that. Now, I'm not saying Drake can shoot that well, but that's the way to beat them. Certainly, they have a major disadvantage in the interior. And speaking of Oregon, let's go there. 10-7 VCU, 5-point underdog to the 7 seed Oregon Ducks. Very difficult game, and certainly one that I think, when we talk about Iowa in a second, you're going to be careful in that second round game. So let's start with VCU out of the A10. Bones Highland, incredible player, really impressive. They're going to need him. He got in major foul trouble against St. Bonaventure in that championship game. Basically only played the second half. He had 3 in the first half in terms of fouls. He's 8,100 here. Can he have success against the Oregon? What do you make of him in this spot?
Yeah, he could have success against anyone. And if they have a chance in this game, it's going to have to come all through him. His usage rate is just so incredible that he has to be in consideration as a contrarian stud. Literally taking 30% of the shots and 35% of the rebounds, along with 28% of the assists last 3 games. He's playing almost every minute when he's not in foul issues. I'm not targeting anybody else on VCU, but if you want to play a contrarian Bones Highland, he has to be in play, and he's the only path this team has to winning the game.
No doubt about it. And as you see by the pricing, he's the most expensive player in this game. The next 5 salaries are all Oregon players. And that's really what we're dealing with. It's kind of a one-man team in a lot of regards. But let's look to them. I've been impressed. I've always kind of been impressed with the way they play. They've got a lot of guys. Duarte, probably my favorite. But what do you make of how this distribution falls?
They play 5 dudes every single minute, and it doesn't deviate. They don't get in a lot of foul trouble typically. If that happens by chance, maybe you see like Chandler Lawson or Amari Hardy play more, depending on who's in foul trouble. But they're going to play 5 dudes, and they're all going to play 35 minutes. All of them are in play because of that. The usage is pretty distributed, I would say, evenly between them. So Duarte, he makes sense at 7,300. I think he's a little buy low right now, but there's even cheaper options that have similar usage rates, like Will Richardson at 6,400. He's been particularly good of late, and he's still too cheap. You have Figueroa, who's 300 more than that at 6,700. He's a really good defender, but he's taking a ton of shots, 22% of those. It leads the team in their last 3. Cheapest is Eric Williams, easily playing over 30 minutes a game. His rates have dipped a little bit, but you're still getting good peripheral upside, north of 15% rebounder and assist rate last 3. All 5 Oregon starters are in play.
Tough game. Lean to Oregon. Have not bet it. Very interested to see it, though. You've mentioned just a different type of team, really can beat you in a lot of different ways. So keep an eye on that one. But to close out the West, 1 game left. Here we go. Bottom of it, the 2 seed, the team that I think most think they already played Gonzaga once and it may happen again. But first, they got to get past the Antelopes. The 15 seed, Grand Canyon, 14.5-point dogs, taking on Iowa. My boys out of the WAC. Bryce Drew is the coach. I love this team so much. It's a terrible matchup, though. Let's start with them. I mean, they've got some size. I think they're going to have problems, of course, with Garza, but Midcard can really play. Blackshear on the outside. Everyone is very reasonably priced. Is there any reason to target someone on Grand Canyon?
I think there is, and it's solely a price factor. So the total here is very good overall. It's a 145 total, giving Grand Canyon a decent look. There's implied for just north of 65, which is in kind of that mid-price range on the lower end of it, but still. And Grand Canyon hasn't played a competitive game recently. They kind of just rolled through their conference tournament, and they were able to expand their rotation. And when we've seen them playing competitive games, they are willing to narrow it. So a guy even like Oscar Freyer, who's 3,600 on DraftKings, will play over 30 minutes in competitive spots. He does function on the interior, so he gets the tougher matchup. Garza has shown a weakness against other big men at times, but Freyer, I think, is just a supreme value play. You have guys like Mickey Dixon, Javon Blackshear. None of them are expensive. Osborne Michgard, not expensive either. I think just because they're so cheap, you could take a look at one of these Grand Canyon players, with Freyer being the best value at 3,600, just an unbelievable price.
It's going to be interesting because Freyer, he stretches the D for sure. He's definitely a 3-point shooter. And that could change the dynamic a little, but ultimately Iowa is just so high powered. And this game kind of reflects that. Looking at the total, healthy 144.5. So we know Luka Garza is the player of the year, flat 10K, most expensive player on the slate. Is it worth it?
I think this is a situation where you have Mobley a little cheaper in a competitive game, and you have Garza here against, Grand Canyon. I'd say their strength is inside, but at the same time, I was a 14.5-point favorite. So how much does Garza actually need to play in this game is the real question. He's going to be extremely used when he's on the floor. You're just balancing kind of the opportunity cost between Garza versus Mobley and another player we'll talk about later on North Carolina, Greensboro, and Miller. So there's just some very good options around Garza's price range that I don't know you need to get to him.
Anyone else in terms of the Hawkeyes? They've got a lot of 3-point shooting, the Bohannons of the world. Do you look to the other forward in Wieskamp, or is it just let it be and kind of their price to the premium?
It's let it be for me. They are priced to a premium. I'm worried about Wieskamp's minutes. So he got hurt in the Big Ten tournament. He's healthy enough to play, and they played him 37 and 35 minutes in their latter 2 games. But at the same time, there's no need to rush him out there for another 35 minutes. So why not get him out there, knock off some rust, and then pull him out of the game if it's out of hand? So Wieskamp, I think, is risky for that reason. Bohannon has a decent usage rate, but how many minutes does he play? I think you could maybe look to him at 6,800 to attack the team total. He'd be my favorite play overall if I was taking a player on Iowa.
Going to be interesting. Like I said, I would love to say that Grand Canyon can Oral Roberts it up. It's going to be a tough sell for me, even though I'm a fan of the team. All right, let's move to the final region here. We've got 8 more games. We'll find a way to get him, no problem, because we can steal some minutes right now. Texas Southern, 25.5-point dogs, taking on number 1 Michigan. There's not going to be a ton to say here. This team beat Mount St. Mary's. Is there any reason to play anyone on Texas Southern?
No.
Okay. Now we've got Michigan. Levers is hurt. So we've got Franz Wagner, Dickinson. They've got options, but is it the same question? How many minutes do we see from the top end guys?
It's the same situation as Gonzaga. I don't think you see a lot from Wagner, Dickinson, Smith, or Brooks. At least 20, but probably not for much more unless this game would shockingly remain competitive. I don't see that happening. I do think they probably try to get a little bit of run out of Chaundi, Austin Davis, and Brandon Johns just because the Livers injury is still fresh. They've only been without him for one game. So they're trying to figure things out without him. So I think maybe one of those players as a value could be worth a look, but ultimately they're going to be just as risky as the ancillary players on Gonzaga.
Really not much to say here. This is an uneventful game. To me, it's unbettable. Kind of doing with that. We'll see. But the biggest thing I want to talk about is what we're talking about next. Michigan gets a bye in the first round. The second round could be anything but that. St. Bonaventure and LSU is going to be an absolute battle. The 9 and the 8 seed. The Bonnies are a 2-point dog, 144.5. This is a good game across the board. Let's start with the A10 champs. Kyle Lofton is unbelievable. Really impressed with him. They've got a really good big as well. This team can play. So how do you think they attack what LSU is one of the most athletic teams in the tournament? Where do the Bonnies go? And are those two big 1-2 for them in play?
I honestly think their entire starting five is in play. It's an up-tempo spot for them against LSU, who plays with incredible pace. LSU's a little weak inside. They do really force you to shoot the three, which is where they're solid defensively. But St. Bonaventure is another one of these teams with such a tight rotation. I think you could look to any of their starting five. Ocean Eye is a little bit expensive, but he'll play every minute. Good rates, their primary rebounder. Kyle Lofton, he's their usage leader overall. He's very used across categories, but his 37% assist rate really highlights that. My favorite play price adjusted is Jaren Holmes. His usage rate is just a fraction below Lofton's, and he's also very consistent across all the categories, highlighted by his 22% shot rate. And you also save $1,000 by going to Jaren Holmes. So I do like him quite a bit.
And he's another player, several games has played straight 40 minutes. Like there's a real chance today that he doesn't come off the court. 3 of 16 against VCU. So a lot of bounce back equity there. On the other side, LSU is so athletic, and they've got a lot of combo guys. Cameron Thomas is really good, and that's not to mention, certainly Watford and Smart. I don't know exactly what St. Bonaventure is going to try to do, though they will have a plan, of course. Can you pay these tags, though? Smart 71, Thomas 79, Watford all the way at 87.
I think you can pay it. So Watford's priced up a little bit here after he went completely hero in that SEC championship game against Alabama. But again, Watford, Thomas, and Smart play every single minute, no matter what, unless one of them is in foul trouble. Watford has a fantastic usage rate. It comes consistent across categories, so he's a good play. But you have the usage leader in Cam Thomas now priced down a little bit at 7,900. His usage rate is up at 25%, which is just elite. He's their main shooter, taking over 25% of the shots, also playing every single minute. And his assist rate has increased recently, partially because Watford has just been dominating so much. But I love the price on Cam Thomas. Javonte Smart, if you're looking for even further savings at 7,100 and 6,700 on FanDuel, is a great price for him. He's a little less involved than the two aforementioned players, but has an elite assist rate up at 44%. All three of these big studs are in play.
Great game here. I do lean LSU in the game. Not sure I'm going to bet it. Maybe I'll take it live. Just two really good teams and one on Monday. I have a feeling that we'll be giving Michigan all that they could ask for. No doubt in my mind there. All right, 12-5. Georgetown, the Hoyas, 6-point dogs, playing Colorado, the 5 seed, 137.5 total. We all know that Georgetown wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a miraculous run in the Big East tournament. Where are they? I don't know. I mean, Oregon State continued it. They looked fantastic yesterday. I think this may be a little different. Let's start with the Hoyas, though. They've got a lot of size and they are playing well, but is this a team we can really trust?
Trust?
No.
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
This team was sub 500 coming into the Big East tournament. Obviously, they rolled in there. Beating Creighton in particular was the best thing they did. So they are rounding into form. You could talk to me about things like momentum, but I think this Georgetown team is a lot weaker than Colorado overall. It's borne out in all of the efficiency metrics. You have Colorado 30th in offensive efficiency, Georgetown 183rd. On defense, Colorado, they're 42nd, Georgetown's 126th. Colorado also the second best free throw shooting team in the country. So if this comes down to the stretch, Colorado holds a number of advantages. I bet them at 5. You can still get it at 6, which I'm willing to lay.
I bet 6 this morning, so I'm with you. You mentioned everyone was so impressed. Oh man, Oral Roberts, they put that game on ice. Colorado shoots like that from the free throw line. It is that type of team. McKinley Wright is the leader, do everything guard. He's 8,600. Would you go to him or would you rather go inside? I mean, Horn can really shoot it. Batty, they've got guys, and I think they'll match up well with Georgetown.
I think so too. Unfortunately, they run kind of a wide rotation. They're going to get 10 players in there, 9 or 10. McKinley Wright's the only one that is guaranteed to play above 30 minutes. Occasionally, you'll see guys like Horn and Batty play more than 30. Deshaun Schwartz as well, and he's the cheapest. So he'd probably be where I look, but you're just dealing with a risky situation there, not knowing if one of them is going to play 25 or 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah, this is a game, though. I have big plans for Colorado. It's the first game, so it'll be a quick day for me, or I'll be riding high and getting some momentum because they tip right at 12:15. If you are looking for more wagers, you're interested in stuff like that, get in the Slack. Sign up for Awesemo.com, weekly passes, get the March Madness package. I'm in there all day dropping some things. We've got Matt, we've got the whole team, plenty of good Slack members as well to keep you up to speed. One more game in this top tier of the East region. It's kind of a weird game, honestly. You've got UNC Greensboro, 10.5-point dogs against Florida State, 144. It's just a really bad matchup. I like UNC Greensboro, but I couldn't think of a worse team for them to play in terms of the Noles. Do you feel that same way, or are you seeing something different here?
No, I like Florida State here. It's not a game I bet because I do think UNC Greensboro is a pretty good team. Did you bet this game?
I didn't. I wanted to. UNCG, they press a lot, and I just think, honestly, that Florida State might want that. It could get really out of control. They have a great coach, and I'm a fan of this team. I watch a lot of that conference in terms of Wofford and Furman and those teams. But I did not bet it. If this was 12.5, something like that, I would have. But what do you see here? I mean, you alluded to Miller early. He's $9,000. Is that tag justified?
I think it is. One thing you mentioned about the press I want to touch on quick before we get there and why I haven't really touched the game. Florida State's pretty risky with the ball. They rank 253 in offensive turnovers, and the higher that number is, the worse. So if you were 300 in offensive turnovers, you'd be very, very bad. So Florida State, they're pretty risky with the ball. UNCG with that press, they rank 58 in defensive turnovers. So they're creating a ton of them. It's a big mismatch in this spot. So if Florida State's risky with the ball, I don't know if they cover the spread here, which is ultimately why I haven't bet it. But for DFS purposes, I mean, you have the usage leader on the entire slate for this game. It's Isaiah Miller. His usage rate is just unbelievable. 26%, plays every minute, taking 30% of the shots, 25% of the boards, and nearly 40% of the assists. This team has a decent implied team total here because the overall game is totaled at 144 points. So unlike some other studs on these bad teams, you actually have a usable team total with Isaiah Miller, and I think it keeps him firmly in play because of that.
Is there anyone else on UNCG, or is this seriously just a one-man band to keep them in it?
It basically is a one-man band.
Yeah, I would agree. On the other side, talk about getting a lot of guys in there. Florida State runs a 35-man rotation, which seems impossible because there's only like 12, 15 guys on a team. But they do it, let me tell you. Leonard Hamilton using the cheat codes. How do you prioritize a team that has this wide of a rotation?
I don't think you target them today. The prices are bad. Scotty Barnes, $7,400 for Scotty Barnes is ridiculous. And then everybody else, you can't really guarantee minutes. We've seen like Polite jump up for 30 minutes, Barnes, Raekwon Gray at various points. You just have no idea who's going to play what allotment of minutes.
Yeah, tough game. I'm interested to see this one just to see what Florida State comes up with and if UNCG can make it a game, but not my favorite. All right, got about 12, 15 minutes left. We got 4 games, so we're doing well here. Let's go to the bottom tier. We've got UCLA, we've got BYU, and certainly if there's a player or anyone that we didn't get to, hit us up on Twitter, get in Slack. We'll be happy to answer that. I know we just have 16 games here. Get a little crazy, but this is another team in UCLA that we've already seen. You know, they were impressive, I guess, against Michigan State, won the game in overtime. Now they take on BYU, 4-point dogs for the Bruins, 138.5 total. I guess simply, where is UCLA at? Are there players? They had one of their key guys sprain an ankle. Are they at full strength? And What do you expect here?
Yeah, that was Johnny Juzang. He's going to play today, according to reports, but nobody knows at what capacity. The injury looked bad when it occurred, but it's just really impossible to know right now what capacity Juzang is going to play. He's an important piece of this offense, very good shooter for the team, one of the most used players they have, but this team does have other options. So Jaquez, Jules Bernard, Tiger Campbell, they'll all play a ton of minutes as well. It's a very narrow distribution of minutes. BYU is another team that doesn't have a great level of competition. And really at every step they played someone good, mainly just Gonzaga, they got absolutely killed. So UCLA coming out of the Pac-12, obviously the superior conference, they're the team I want to back right now. I wish we had injury news on Juzang, and this line actually got pulled for me, so it's not a game I can bet. But for DFS, I think you can look at Jaquez, Juzang, Bernard, and Campbell. Probably not Juzang because of the injury, but the other three because of the narrow rotation.
On the other side, you mentioned BYU, difficult team to really break down. They're in the Zags conference, so they don't play a ton of good teams. They've had their chances with Gonzaga. They probably pushed them closer than anyone else, and really it wasn't that close in the second half. What do you make of like a guy like Harms on the inside? Will he cause problems, or do you look to the guards?
I don't think Harms will cause problems. He can't play more than 20 minutes, but the guards do. Sorry, not to be mean to Harms. I apologize if you're listening.
Hey, you can take all the Purdue slander you want today after that showing last night. That's fine.
He's a Purdue transfer that Ben's alluding to. Harms, he's a big 7-foot monster, but he can't play a lot of minutes typically. Otherwise, Barcello is somebody I actually really like here. Barcello is a great 3-point shooter, and that's how you beat UCLA. They rank 242 in 3-point defense. He has the best usage rate on the team, and this team was running a pretty nasty rotation to begin the year. They've consolidated some of their minutes, and Barcello is one of the guys who has seen his minutes increase, 34 and 40 in back-to-back games for him.
Tough game. I want to see what happens. If BYU gets out of the first week and they need to change the schedule, because BYU doesn't play on Sundays. I learned that in my research of this team. They're moving mountains for them. We will see what happens there. I do think they get by today, and then they'll take on Texas. No, they won't. We'll see. Let's go there right now. Everyone just penciled Texas in. Not so fast. Abilene Christian +9, the 14 seed, taking on the Texas Longhorns, the champs of the Big 12. I got a lot to say here. I'm going to summarize it very quickly. Abilene Christian is the Southland champ. They are first in the entire country in turnovers forced, number 1 at over 19 per game. Their defense is absolutely outstanding. Golding, their coach, is one of the best in the country. He's going to get a big-time job. This team can put serious pressure on Texas. I do not know if they can score enough, and that is why when you look at the prices in DFS, you see that no one is even remotely close to the ceiling in Miller, Mason, and Cole. Do you like anyone on Abilene Christian in this slate, or do you think more it's just that they can possibly hang in the game?
Abilene Christian hasn't played anybody competitively recently. All of their last 3 games have a margin of victory north of 20 points. Abilene Christian, a very strong team. You actually got me on this. Love what they do creating turnovers, like you mentioned. And Texas is pretty risky with the ball. They're another team like Florida State that is not very safe with the ball. So I think Abilene Christian could give them problems for that reason. They also match up pretty well against Texas. Texas, their strength is their front court with Jericho Sims, Greg Brown, Kai Jones, among others. Abilene Christian is one of the few teams that has enough size, I think, to at least slow them down there between Colton Cole and Joe Pleasant. Again, we haven't seen a lot of minute consistency out of these guys, but I think that's more because Abilene Christian is just slaughtering their opponents than them trying to just trot out, or their preference to trot out 10 people. I think this rotation narrows a little bit in a competitive game, but what do you think about that? I know they're your team.
They are my team. I have seen a lot. They have other bigs, though. Simmons is not a guy that I'm saying to target by any stretch, but if he has to play 15 or 20 minutes, I feel fine about that because I do think they may get into some foul trouble. I wouldn't go further than that, but they run enough bigs to mitigate the size. The way they win this game is by Texas having 20, 25 turnovers. That is their only out, and I do think that that is possible. On the other side, though, for Texas, do you look to Coleman? Do you look to Jones? Do you look to the inside? Is there anything that piques your interest?
Their big men remind me of North Carolina, where they're going to try out at least 3 of them, probably 4, making them extremely volatile. We've seen Jericho Sims play a lot of minutes recently, but he also gets in foul trouble quickly and often. So that's very risky. Greg Brown, he did get into foul trouble, nearly fouled out in 6 minutes in their last game. So there's at least a little untapped upside with Greg Brown. But again, a lot of players there, a lot of foul issues. The guards, I'm more willing to look here, despite what I said about their turnovers. Andrew Jones has the best price. They've used a little bit less Courtney Ramey of late, and Matt Coleman's price way up at $8K. Jones actually is their usage leader on the year. He's a little bit of a buy low at 6,900 and 5,400, respectively, DraftKings and FanDuel. So he'd be where I look, but he's not a preferred play, just a middling GPP option.
Ebeline Christian going to oddshopper.awesemo.com is plus 350 if you don't want to lay the points. I'm there. I do think that they have a chance to win this game, and I certainly like them getting 9. 2 games left. One of them is, I think, the equivalent of what you were saying about Colgate. I want to ask you, were you sweating even a little bit at the beginning of the Arkansas game?
No, I hit it live instantly.
Okay.
I got Arkansas at plus 1.5.
Yeah, and then it turned. Imagine if you bet Colgate in the first half, money line. That would have been very painful because that 19-0 run to get things back in order. You have mentioned, as we go to the 2 seed here, with Alabama and Iona. Iona is a 16.5-point dog. That you don't see this staying even remotely close. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's entirely because Alabama's shown a willingness to run up the score on competition. Like Baylor yesterday, they didn't care to do so. They didn't cover their 26-point spread, which is a different number than what we see here. But at the same time, Alabama has shown no fear running up the score.
Yeah, no mercy. Does that mean, though, does it translate to guys like Herb Jones playing more minutes than you would expect?
I doubt it so if you look to their third most recent game, they won by 37 points. Here's the minutes they allocated to their starters. Shackelford, 18, Petty, 19, Quinterly, 22, Herb Jones, 17. If it gets out to this enormous lead, that's where you're going to see these starters.
I'm interested. I mean, I know it's a somewhat short turnaround, but I will say, just to speak to their willingness to kill everybody, that game against Mississippi State, they had multiple games in a row planned after that. So I think there's more of a willingness to call off the dogs there than to call off the dogs here.
That is true.
But we'll see. On the other side, Iona, the Fighting Rick Pitino's, I don't know, man. This team, I was impressed that they had serious COVID issues. Isaiah Ross, I mean, he's going to be out there a lot and he's going to take a lot of shots. It's just Alabama's defense is really strong. They're going to cause problems. Is there any reason to mess around with the 15 seed here?
I don't think so. Unlike some other teams that are a little, I guess you could say, bigger underdogs with usage leaders, this team has 2 guys they kind of use as their main guys, Ross and Gist. So I would rather just take a team that uses one player and you can really rely on them for consistency. I don't think we see that here, and it really could be either one of them.
Yeah, listen, Alabama's a team I think is very dangerous. They've got bigger things to do than beat up on Iona. So let's get to the last game. Then we'll have a couple minutes. We'll summarize and we'll bounce on out of here. Coming up next, though, I believe NASCAR is on the channel. So if you have that, you want to see the cars go around the circle, hop on in. There's some money to be made there. We've got the experts to really help you build those lineups. But we've got Maryland. We've got UConn, 7-10. Maryland, 3.5-point dogs. I'll be honest. Maryland's been a pain point all year. I really don't know how good this team is. I really don't know how the production falls. Wiggins, Ayala, Scott, a million guys, Morcell. It never ends. Let's start with them. Do you think they're any good? And do you feel that one of them is under or overpriced?
It's like a Rutgers situation. It's the back end of the Big Ten. We don't know how good these teams are because they're getting beat up by Michigan and Illinois every week. But for DFS, Aaron Wiggins plays an incredible role. He's only 200 cheaper than Ayala, and he's taking at least 24% of the shots, rebounds, and assists in their last 3 games. He'd be where I look as a contrarian stud, but really low total in this game. I don't think you play it in DFS, but if you just want a contrarian stud, Wiggins has the usage rate to potentially take a look at.
On the other side, UConn's season, of course, was in flux without Book Night. He came back. They steadied the ship. Now we've got RJ Cole. They've got a team here. What do you make of him at 7,700? Whaley, Cole, and the rest of these guys? And I believe Cole is available. Is he not?
He is available.
Okay, so they're looking pretty good. Do you like UConn, and how do you see them breaking down the production?
I don't like them for DFS just because of prices. RJ Cole's a little expensive at 6,500. Same thing with Book Night. There's just other players in those ranges I'd prefer. But RJ Cole is back, and I think that's big for the spread here because Maryland's main weakness is against three-point shooters. Believe it or not, James Bouknight's just a 30% three-point shooter. He's not great from beyond the arc, and there's a lot of players on UConn that don't shoot the three real well, but RJ Cole's not that. He's their only three-point shooter, 38% from beyond the arc. So having him back does take advantage of that matchup. When he was announced to be active, I was surprised the spread didn't move. I haven't bet it yet, but I'm looking at UConn.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's a great way to kind of summarize that, and maybe I'll look at UConn as well. We've got about 60 seconds left. So let's just quickly go to your DFS plays of the days. We talked about a lot of guys. I think, the theme that I got from you is that you're more able to pay up and then punt, whether it's with Frayer and co. What do you have to say kind of as the slate as a whole?
I think it's a better slate to do a Star Scrubs approach than yesterday, because you have players like Frayer on Grand Canyon. You have players like Lightfoot, who's probably going to see, I wouldn't say a big role, but an increased role. Umoja Gibson's available for Oklahoma. There's just more value plays that you feel comfortable with today. And that allows you to get towards players like Mobley and Isaiah Miller in that very upper echelon of pricing.
No doubt about it. A lot of options, 16 games again. So let's see how that falls. Last thing before we bounce on out of here, we'll jump to the betting boards again. I will have a lot of plays on this game, so if you want the full card, get into Slack. My favorite bet of the day is Colorado. They're right in front. I think they rolled Georgetown. Sorry, Patrick Ewing. What about you if you had to pick one?
We're in lockstep there. We're in lockstep there. If I'm looking to my second favorite bet, I'll say it's Creighton. If you can get it -7, love that there.
God, this is going to be – we have a show tomorrow. We're going to be breaking down the second round. But if Creighton and Colorado both lose, it's going to be Matt and somebody else. I don't know if I could show my face. My two teams. Let's see what they can do today. This has been a fun slate. Chat, thanks again. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe to the channel. And again, coming up next, stay tuned. NASCAR has you covered. Big things there. Thanks to Matt, as always, hanging out with me, breaking down these games. We're going to do it all again tomorrow. Good luck today. See you guys soon.